I stood frozen, my heart sinking as my daughter, Lily, stumbled through the front door, her sobs echoing in our quiet home. Her favorite shirt, a gift with bold letters spelling out "Black Lives Matter," was ripped at the sleeve. She clutched her arm, tears streaming down her face, and I barely registered the sound of the plates slipping from my hands, shattering on the dining room table. "Mom," she cried, collapsing into my arms. "Baby, what happened? Who did this?" I demanded, my voice trembling as I inspected the red mark blooming just above her elbow. Between gasps, Lily managed to explain. "Mrs. Carter, the HOA president, stopped me at the park. She said my shirt broke the rules. When I tried to leave, she grabbed me and hit me with her clipboard." I couldn't believe it. Lily was only 14, an honor student who'd never caused trouble. That shirt? A birthday present from her uncle, my brother James, a civil rights lawyer. "She said kids can't spread propaganda in common areas," Lily added, her voice shaking. "She took pictures and said we'd get a warning." I helped her wash up, then called my husband, David, immediately. As the county police commissioner, he'd dealt with tough situations, but this was personal. This was our daughter. "She did what?" His voice roared through the phone. "I'm on my way home." That night, we sat around the kitchen table, our untouched dinner growing cold as Lily recounted every detail. Mrs. Carter had been watching her from the moment she arrived at the park. 2 other HOA members stood by, nodding as the woman lectured her about community standards and keeping politics out of family spaces. "Did anyone else see?" David asked, his police instincts kicking in as he jotted notes. Lily nodded. "Mr. Hayes was walking his dog. He looked uneasy but didn't speak up. And the new family down the street, their kids were on the swings." David squeezed my hand under the table. "We'll handle this, Sarah. No one touches my girl." The next morning, an official HOA notice arrived in our mailbox, tucked into a crisp envelope. Standing on our pristine lawn in my bathrobe, I read words that ignited my fury. Violation. Political messaging in common areas. Resident Lily Thompson observed wearing provocative apparel in Evergreen Meadows Park on June 3rd at 4:15 p.m. First warning. Subsequent violations subject to fines starting at $250. At the bottom, Mrs. Evelyn Carter had signed her name with a flourish, adding HOA president in bold letters. I stormed inside and slammed the paper onto the kitchen island. "They're formalizing harassment now," I told David as he poured his coffee. He picked it up, his jaw tightening. "There's no bylaw about this. I've read every page we signed. Let me make some calls." After he left for work, I took my usual morning walk through Evergreen Meadows. Normally, Mrs. Larson would wave from her garden, and the Thompsons would invite me for coffee on their porch. But today, Mrs. Larson busied herself with her roses as I passed, and the Thompsons' curtains twitched, their doors staying shut. Near the mailboxes, 3 women I knew from the summer picnic went quiet as I approached. "Good morning," I said with a forced smile. They muttered responses, avoiding my eyes before scurrying off. When I got home, our mailbox was dripping with raw eggs, the yellow mess staining our flower bed. My stomach churned. This wasn't just Mrs. Carter. Something bigger was brewing. I spent the afternoon poring over every HOA document we'd received since moving here 3 years ago. Nothing banned clothing or expression. I called James for legal advice, and he promised to dig deeper. David came home late, his face etched with worry. "They've been busy," he said, loosening his tie. "The mayor called me today, asking if we're having HOA issues. Turns out Mrs. Carter's husband golfs with him every Sunday. I showed him the cleaned-up mailbox and told him about the neighbors' cold stares. Let them try to scare us," he said, pulling me close. "They picked the wrong family." That night, as I took out the trash, I found a note under our doormat. "Control your daughter, or the HOA will." Evergreen has standards some residents don't meet. I stood on our porch, the paper shaking in my hand, wondering what these people might do to us. 5 days later, bright orange notices appeared on every doorstep. Emergency HOA meeting, Thursday, 7 p.m. Attendance mandatory. "They're making their move," David said over breakfast. "Better to face them than guess what's coming." Thursday arrived with storm clouds overhead, mirroring my mood. I straightened my blazer and walked into the community center alone. David had been called to a sudden budget meeting at the station, timing that felt too convenient. The room buzzed with whispers that faded as I entered. Nearly all 87 homes were represented. I took a seat near the back, feeling eyes on me. At 7 o'clock sharp, Mrs. Carter stepped to the podium, her navy suit impeccable, her pearl earrings glinting. "Neighbors, friends," she began, her voice dripping with authority, "we're facing troubled times. Some residents are ignoring our shared values." My face burned as heads turned toward me. Political divisions are tearing apart communities. Evergreen Meadows is a sanctuary from that, a place where kids can play without adult conflicts. Murmurs of agreement spread. "Unfortunately," she said, her tone darkening, "some insist on bringing division here." I couldn't stay quiet. Standing, my chair scraping loudly, I said, "Are you talking about my 14-year-old daughter wearing a Black Lives Matter shirt? The one she had on when you grabbed her and hit her with your clipboard? That's not division. That's assault." The room went silent. Mrs. Carter's smile tightened. "Mrs. Thompson, we understand you're upset, but your daughter's political statements are causing tension. And your husband's threats to use his position against us were inappropriate." "What threats?" I shot back. "He asked about a rule you claim she broke, a rule no one can find in any HOA document." Mr. Bradley, a neighbor 3 doors down, leapt up. "My kids shouldn't see protest messages at the park. Your family's turning it into a rally." Others chimed in. "We moved here to escape that. There are proper channels for politics." I stared at people who'd once brought us welcome pies. Mrs. Carter tapped her microphone. "Order, please. This proves our point. The board has drafted an amendment to clarify common area standards." Papers circulated, and my hands trembled as I read. No clothing, signs, flags, or displays with political, social justice, or controversial messaging allowed in Evergreen Meadows common areas. Definition of controversial to be determined by the board. "This is discrimination," I said, standing again. "You're making a rule after the fact to justify harassing my daughter." Mrs. Carter cut me off. "We're voting tonight. 2/3 majority passes it." I scanned the room for support, finding only averted gazes. "You can't do this. It violates First Amendment rights." "Private communities have latitude to set standards," she replied coolly. "Your brother, the lawyer, should know that." My breath hitched. How did she know about James? "Plus," she added, "we've had complaints about unauthorized gatherings at your home last weekend." She meant Lily's study group, for teens eating pizza. "That's not a noise violation." I protested. She shrugged. "Neighbors reported noise and parking issues. We're implementing a 3-strike policy. Your family has 2 strikes. A third means fines and possible expulsion actions." The room spun. "Expulsion? You can't evict us from our own home. We can make staying here very difficult," she said, her threat clear, "even for families with connections." The amendment passed 59-6. As I left, Mrs. Carter grabbed my arm, her nails biting into my skin. "2 weeks to comply fully, or even your husband's badge won't help. Consider somewhere more suitable." I yanked free and fled to my car in the rain. Driving home, I saw our yard trashed, cups, wrappers, and red spray paint spelling comply across our garage. I called David, my hands shaking. "Straight to voicemail," he said when I finally reached him. "I'm with Internal Affairs. Someone filed an ethics complaint, says I threatened to use department resources against citizens. I've been ordered to step back from anything HOA related or face suspension." The next morning, I found Mrs. Carter's clipboard on our porch with a note, "Final warning." Inside was a photo of Lily at school, circled in red. Rage replaced fear. No one threatens my child. I scoured our HOA rules. Nothing banned political shirts. They'd invented this to target us. "Call Janelle Brooks," David said, seeing the photo. "Best civil rights lawyer in the state." Janelle met us that day. "This is harassment," she said, reviewing our evidence. "That photo? Stalking territory." Emboldened, I ordered matching BLM shirts for us all, even our dog, Max. Sunday, we walked the park in them. Lily smiled, holding David's hand. Mrs. Carter and her cronies followed, snapping photos. "They're building a case," David whispered. "So are we." I photographed them back, evidence for Janelle. At home, our keys didn't work. They'd changed our locks. A locksmith refused service, citing HOA orders. We broke in through a window. Then the water cut off, a notice claiming emergency maintenance until standards are met. Internet died. Power flickered. They're making life hell, I said in the dark. David's phone rang, his boss. Meeting tomorrow. Abuse of power complaint. It's serious. The next day, as I returned from grocery shopping, 6 cars boxed me in our driveway. Mrs. Carter stepped out, smug, with an envelope. Emergency removal proceedings. You have 72 hours to leave. The board voted unanimously. You can't do this. I said, this is our home. She smirked. We changed the bylaws. It's legal now. Your husband's fighting for his job. Such a shame after 20 years. How did she know? She dropped the envelope and left. At 6 a.m. On eviction day, banging woke us. David peeked out, then grinned. It's not them. News vans lined our street. Reporters setting up. Janelle texted, check email. Don't talk yet. Her video showed Mrs. Carter in our driveway. We'll get them out like the Martinezes and those Kenyan doctors. Property values drop with those people. Then Tyler's company buys cheap. David had recorded it. Our doorbell cam caught HOA members vandalizing our home too. I showed Chief proof. Carter's brother-in-law works for the mayor, David said. They've pressured the department to ignore HOA complaints for years. Janelle arrived with legal folders. Injunctions filed. The judge was livid. David's phone rang. The mayor, launching an HOA probe. His job was safe. Chief suspended. Outside, dozens gathered in BLM shirts. Signs reading HOAs can't override rights. Janelle handed me a restraining order. Carter couldn't come near us. Mrs. Carter arrived, waving papers, but froze at the cameras and crowd. David stepped forward. Evelyn Carter, you're under investigation for assault, conspiracy, fraud, and falsifying documents. Reporters swarmed her with questions about targeting families of color and shell companies. She fled, mumbling no comment. By noon, more families reported HOA harassment. Utilities were restored. The mayor apologized. Neighbors apologized too, admitting Carter's threats had silenced them. The next day, Lily showed us trending headlines. Evergreen Meadows scandal. HOA faces charges. Mrs. Carter was arrested. Evidence of fraud and blackmail uncovered. Janelle said displaced families might reclaim their homes. As we watched her perp walk, David smiled. They'll need a new HOA, fair people. Like you. I looked at Lily, fearless in her shirt, and nodded. We'd fought and won a start.